When we look at China and Russia today, the first thing we usually see are carefully staged images of eternal friendship. Xi Jinping and Vladimir Putin smiling together, shaking hands, showing the world that they stand shoulder to shoulder against the West. The message seems clear. Here are two powers united against the United States, against Europe, against the liberal order. But if we look behind the stage lights, behind the speeches and the photo ops, the story changes completely. Yes, Russia needs China desperately. Without massive Chinese economic support, Moscow could hardly continue its war against Ukraine in the way it does today. China buys Russia's oil and gas, provides electronics, chips and industrial machinery, and has become by far the most important trade partner for Putin's regime. On the surface, it almost looks as if the Kremlin has found a loyal friend. But the truth is more complicated. This so-called friendship comes at a heavy price. In reality, China and Russia are not bound by genuine trust, but by necessity, and even more, by rivalry. Behind closed doors, Beijing is exploiting Russia's weakness day by day, always to its own advantage. Think about how Xi and Putin present themselves. At their meetings, they praise each other in glowing terms. Putin talks about an unprecedented level of partnership. Xi replies that China and Russia have stood the test of time and will always support one another. It sounds like a perfect alliance. Yet if we look at the historical relationship between these two powers, the cracks become visible immediately. Russia sees itself as the heir of the Soviet Union, the great empire that once stood toe-to-toe with the United States. It also clings to the idea of the so-called Russian world, the protector of Orthodox Christianity and of all ethnic Russians abroad. For Moscow, this role is almost a divine mission, a justification for intervention wherever Russian minorities live. China, on the other hand, sees itself as the Middle Kingdom, the natural center of the world. This worldview goes back centuries. During the Qing dynasty, foreign rulers had to bow before the Chinese emperor. Even Russian delegations were forced to recognize the Chinese emperor as the son of heaven. This sense of superiority never fully disappeared. And even today, Chinese school maps sometimes show Vladivostok and parts of Russia's Far East as Outer Manchuria, lands that were once Chinese and, in Beijing's view, unfairly taken away. So while Putin likes to talk about eternal brotherhood, China has never truly seen Russia as an equal partner. At best, Moscow is a useful junior. At worst, it is simply a weakened neighbor that can be pressured and exploited whenever convenient. This becomes crystal clear if we look at Russia's dependence on Chinese imports. Before the war, in 2021, Russia's military industry imported about 41% of its war-relevant goods from the European Union and another 41% from China. But after Western sanctions hit, that picture changed completely. By 2023, Europe's share collapsed to just 2%. China and Hong Kong together supplied 76% of the equipment and technology that Russia needed for its war machine. That means, without China, Russian tanks would not roll, Russian missiles would not fly, and Russian factories would go silent. And yet, Beijing gives Moscow nothing for free. Every shipment of electronics, chips, or industrial parts has to be paid for, and often at inflated prices. Putin is forced to accept these terms because he has no alternative. The result, Russia is no longer an equal partner but increasingly a dependent client. And it doesn't stop with technology. Energy tells the same story. On paper, China has become Russia's lifeline by buying its oil and gas after Europe turned away. But here too, Beijing is exploiting the situation to the fullest. China buys Russian energy at massive discounts, sometimes up to 50%. While Putin boasts about finding new buyers in Asia, in reality, Russia is selling its resources far below market value, losing billions of dollars. The so-called Power of Siberia 2 pipeline is the perfect example. When Xi and Putin announced the project, the media called it a symbol of deep partnership. But the reality looks very different. The agreement is not even a binding contract, it's only a memorandum of understanding. No price has been fixed, no timeline agreed. Beijing is pushing for rock-bottom prices, sometimes even demanding Russia's own subsidized domestic rates. So while Moscow invests billions in pipelines and infrastructure, China can wait, delay, and dictate terms. If the day comes that Beijing no longer needs the gas, the whole project could become a giant waste for Russia. And this raises a critical question. Is China really helping Russia, or is it quietly bleeding it dry? From Beijing's perspective, the strategy is brilliant. By keeping Russia dependent, China ensures cheap energy for its own economy, gains strategic leverage over Moscow, and presents itself as the leader of a new anti-Western bloc. At the same time, it makes sure that Russia never becomes strong enough to act independently again. Some analysts even suggest that this is part of China's long game. In the short term, Beijing gives Russia just enough support to keep fighting in Ukraine. Not enough to win, but enough to keep Moscow burning through its resources. In the long run, a weakened Russia could become a source of cheap raw materials, maybe even territory for a rising China. Beijing would never need to invade openly. Economic leverage alone could secure influence over Siberia's vast resources. So what we are really seeing is not an equal alliance, but an unequal relationship in which Russia is increasingly reduced to the role of junior partner. Moscow delivers cheap oil, gas, and raw materials. Beijing dictates the price, the pace, and the conditions. And Putin, who likes to present himself as a great independent leader, is forced to play along. That's why we should be careful when we hear about eternal friendship between China and Russia. The warm words and smiling photos may look convincing, but the physical realities tell a different story. Without Chinese goods, Russia's war machine collapses. Without Chinese buyers, Russia's energy sector shrinks. And without Chinese approval, even North Korean weapons would not reach Russian troops. For Putin, this is a dangerous game. In trying to show that Russia has powerful friends, he may have trapped his country in long-term dependence on Beijing. The question is not whether China and Russia stand together today, but what this relationship will look like tomorrow. Will China continue to buy discounted oil and gas? Will it keep supplying machine parts for the Russian military? Or will it use its leverage to demand even more, knowing that Putin has no choice but to say yes? So are China and Russia true allies? Or is this so-called eternal friendship really a one-sided relationship that benefits Beijing far more than Moscow? For Putin, the danger is obvious. Russia risks becoming little more than China's resource colony, a weakened neighbor that provides cheap energy while losing its independence piece by piece. And when it comes to the Power of Siberia pipeline, is it really a victory for Moscow, or just another brilliant move by Beijing to tighten its grip? What do you think? Is China saving Russia or slowly strangling it? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to hear your perspective.